Welcome back to the Citizen channel, or welcome if you've been here before, but this is a part 2 of a special feature, so if you've not watched part 1, guys, please seek it out. It will be on the links and in the description below, and it's of course part 2 of City Imports, where we're looking at the Polish legend, of course, Deyna. So we finished part 1 of where Deyna had come to City. He'd been struggling just a little bit to adapt and get used to the pace and the physicality of the game. He hadn't played too many matches. But he's seemingly doing okay at home. There's a special feature in the City Match magazine of 20th of January 1979 against Chelsea. It was called The Blues Off Duty, where you got a nice family photo and obviously information. But nothing inspiring, just general information. So he seemed okayish away from football. He was settling into this house, of course. Peter Gardner interviewed him at his Wilmslow home at the time. Looked quite nice, and yeah, it was interesting. I mean, Gardner made comparisons with his place in Poland, of course, where he'd spent all his life before this. It wasn't a hardly spacious flat in Poland, but by Polish levels, it was very, very good. And he did have a BMW car parts up here in Wilmslow outside his house, and he did comment that back in Poland he had a big car as well. It was, a nice big sedan, but obviously at night you would have to take anything that wasn't nailed down, because little tea leaves in Poland would nick parts of cars. So I think he still kept his wheels. He didn't have to take them off every night. That would have been a bit of a pain, wouldn't it, guys? But like you see, it would take his wiper blades off, stuff like this that actually people could take and sell on. So he didn't have to do that, obviously, in leafy Wilmslow at the time. So I think he was doing okay. And he did admit that although he had a lot to offer City and English football, he would have still preferred to make the move a couple of years earlier, when perhaps he's a little bit more in his prime. As I say, he was 30 when he joined City. And his footballing hero, we told Peter Gardner, was Bobby Charlton. We'll have to let him off for that one, won't we, guys? But, as a football person, I suppose, yeah, he was perhaps someone to admire. Yeah, we'll let him off with that. We'll let him off. Yeah, on the 27th of January, of course, that season, we're talking about the 78-79 season, Deyna was given a lesson in English football along with the rest of us when he played in the humiliating defeat in the 4th round of the FA Cup, when we went down 2-0 at Shrewsbury Town. Were you there that day? Obviously, not great, was it? And Deyna would beginning to feature in reserve team fixtures. Yeah, there was sort of something bubbling. He wasn't quite at it playing for the first team. I think there was still some personal problems, even though it all seemed nice and rosy in Wilmslow. And for the reserves, though, he was still doing the job. He'd notched 6 goals. And he also did manage a sub-appearance in his only competitive game in Europe that season. We'd seen off Milan, of course, where obviously we would be put out by Borussia Mönchengladbach, and the 3-1 loss away in Germany. He actually came on and replaced Nicky Reed as a substitute. But finally, when City faced Middlesbrough on the 24th of April, it was only his 6th start in the league. He scored his first City goal and the only goal in a 1-0 win, so he was pretty chuffed with that. Was the genie out of the bottle? Well, possibly. He started the last 7 games of the 78-79 season for City, and in addition to this goal against Borough, he scored 2 against Birmingham, 1 against Bristol, and 2 in the final game of the season against Aston Villa. Peter Gardner himself commenting in the Manchester Evening News for local papers, or quoted for other papers, in his end-of-season review, stated that Deyna had become a goal-scoring hero. Okay, don't overdo it, but yeah, I can see the point. But, yes, interestingly enough, we knew, didn't we, the arrival of Alisson, of course, had coincided with other big names leaving. Obviously, Deyna hadn't been there that long to perhaps for Alisson to kick out that much while Tony Buck was still officially in charge. But we had Brian Kidd leaving us. We had Futcher, I think it was Ron Futcher, or Paul Futcher, I think it was Ron Futcher leaving us, Barnes, Owen, Watson, of course, Hartford, and then obviously early evening into the 79-80 season, the season after, Mike Shannon would also follow on the way out. So Alisson had started his sort of mini revolution, hadn't he? And we'd also, of course, nothing to do with Alisson, we'd also had to say goodbye to Colin Bell, who admitted defeat on his try and fight back from his injury as well, that 78-79 season. But Deyna was on a high, wasn't he? After his impressive form at the end of the season, he smiled happily. He's there, featured on the 79-80 squad photo next to Alisson and Buck. Perhaps he was having a word with them. We're not too sure, but they're on the squad image. But as we know, Buck was more and more sidelined and was now sidelined, and the Alisson revolution was in full tilt. I mean, in the background, we could see obviously what was happening, and obviously Alisson had moved up a little step and actually became the guy in charge. So Deyna would have to prove his worth to Alisson, of course, but Alisson, as is his want, we lost players, but he would start to bring in players as well to compete for places. In fact, where Deyna would be playing people like Bobby Shinton, Robinson, Stepanovic. I mean, it wasn't a direct battle for Deyna to take his role, but he was just another player that was added to the squad that Deyna had to compete with. We had McKenzie, of course, added by Malcolm Alisson in that sort of midfield, sort of striker midfield sort of role. But Deyna did start the season, did start the 79-80 season. It was unfortunately a pretty disappointing 0-0 home draw with Crystal Palace. He did start at number 10. And in our next game, again, these little problems that were simmering under the surface. He was actually subbed at half-time. He did claim not to know why he was subbed. But obviously there was a mini fallout, and he certainly didn't play for the first team for the next few games. Through all this, of course, it was also thought that Deyna had a bit of a drink problem and was suspended for at least one DUI whilst at City, and was suspended from City as well. He did have personal problems behind the scenes. I think one of the features in a moment with Malcolm Alisson talks about obviously him having to go back over to Poland and sort certain things out. He was no doubt cheered up slightly as City played a friendly away. Part of the agreement with the transfer was obviously playing a couple of friendlies against Legia Warsaw, and obviously we played a friendly away in Poland at his old club Legia Warsaw, and he received a hero's welcome from the Polish fans. So that probably cheered up, I think, a pretty miserable Deyna at the time. Certainly on the pitch, he was still struggling after that great end to the last season to make an impact again. And after the trip to Poland for a friendly with that old club, he all appeared to be forgiven back at home as well. Perhaps the hierarchy had forgiven him. And after that instance of him being subbed and not knowing why in a recent game, he had his return to first team action away at Leeds on the 29th of September 1979. He was back on the score sheet. So obviously that trip back to Poland and all the problems seemed hopefully to put to one side, and he scored in a 2-1 win at Ellen Road. In the meantime, of course, we've mentioned the players coming in. He had even more competition with the arrival of Steve Daly and Stuart Lee, so another couple of names to compete with Deyna for that midfield stroke attacking sort of option. But winning goals against Middlesbrough and Forest in succession at Main Road looked as though his goal-scoring regularity at the end of last season would continue now into this. Now he'd got a little bit of a run. The media flattered him in print, were saying good things about him, of course. Us, the fans, were singing his name in the stands. Buck did talk about the fact that Deyna had to be accommodated, which is an interesting way of putting it, as an out-and-out striker in a handful of games that had worked, as we've seen, as he started to score these goals. It was said by Tony Buck, and probably said by other people as well, he did like that the physicality of a midfield battle, but Deyna denied that. He thought his sort of skill would overcome that, and would obviously the benefits of his silkiness and the calm way he did things and used his head would outweigh the facts of his lack of physicality. So it was interesting. There was definitely a sort of rubbing together or disagreement with Buck and Deyna, and obviously Alisson and Deyna as the coach. Alisson was the coach by then, on just what his role and what his best role was. And I think both he and the club management, if you like, didn't quite agree on what it was. but went on to say the pressure was on for him to contribute goals on a regular basis as a striker. So, yeah, giving him even more pressure that if he's going to play, he's expected to score goals. Deyna was starting games at number 11, but sadly, again, the goals dried up, though he's part of the team that played in front of over 50,000 fans in a wonderful celebration. I was there that day, 2-0 win over the old enemy United on the 10th of November 1979. He wasn't contributing on the goal front. He certainly enjoyed that, as you can see from the celebrations, but yeah, he finally got on the score sheet. Ironic, this is again how ironic perhaps City are, typical City in the circumstances. He finally scored on the 1st of December in a 3-2 loss at home to Wolves. But sadly, that didn't stop him being dropped. He was playing in the reserve team the following week. Well, that sort of sums up, obviously, what Deyna's sort of stance was and what the management stance was at City for that to happen. All right, we'd been beat, but at least he'd got back on the score sheet. But obviously, we weren't happy with his overall performance. But even that didn't go to plan, because the week after, it was a reserve game against Derby County. Again, just to wind Allison and Buck up and everybody up at Maynard. He actually turned up late for the reserve game. Now, he blamed the fact that he wasn't aware because of the winter timings and the darkness. City started kicking off at 2 p.m. for the Central League games, probably to save 50p in the meter for the floodlights. But so they started kicking off at 2, and obviously Deyna had turned up for a 3 o'clock kickoff. So obviously he missed the start, and because City had presented the teams to the officials, they had to start the game with 10 men. Were you there that game? I say I did go to a lot of reserve games, more in the 70s, so I wouldn't have been at this one. So were you there at that game? We were turning up late, but obviously it wouldn't have gone down well. And they say he did. In all fairness to Deyna, I would side with him. I probably didn't realise, and it was, but it was just how it was. And say that it certainly wouldn't have gone down well with Buck and Allison, the fact that he turned up late for his first game back in the reserves, because to them it would have looked as though he was just obviously being obstinate because he'd been dropped from the first team again. So, and just to add insult to injury, we lost that game 3-0 as well. So things aren't going great at the guys. So please, that's the end of part 2. Join me for part 3 of Imports Cashew Deyna. And yes, apart from things getting better, there could be a lot more trouble ahead for our Polish legends. So please join me again for part 3. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please, I only ask one thing, don't I? Please stay safe, Blues. Come on, City. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.